Alright, and welcome. This morning I had a 3.5 hour Zone 2 ride scheduled. Now during that ride I wanted to start also training my gut for the carbohydrate load that I'm looking at doing in cans. So sort of easing into that, I was looking at gels of 60 grams per hour. So the total requirement there is around that 210 grams. Now, if we look at the cost of that, which was one of the things I wanted to talk about today, is I just went and had a quick look at 3 different types of gels. I looked at the Enduro gel, which is a 26 grams of carbs. I was going to need 9 of those just for a 3.5 hour ride at $27. The other option was the Precision PF30 gel. There's 30 grams of carbs in that one, so a little more. And that would mean that I would need only 7 gels, but they were $4.75 a gel, so now I'm at $33.25. And then we have the Morton gel, which are a great gel, the Gel 100s. They're a 25 gram of carb. I'm going to need 8.4 of those for the 3.5 hour ride, so I'm going to need 9 at $5.19 a gel, so it's nearly 50 bucks there. It's $46.70. So we're starting to get up there, and this is just one of the rides in a week. And as you guys know, we're also running and we're doing our long runs, so we're going to need gels for that. And we're adding in other rides and swims during the week where we're using carbohydrates. So what's our alternative? And very simply, our alternative is to make our own gels up. And that's what I want to talk about in today's video. So for those who are new to the channel and don't know me, welcome. For those who have been here before, welcome back. My name is Des Trindle. I'm a 57-year-old triathlete based in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, juggling the demands of full-time work, family, and obviously training for an Ironman. So I understand the time constraints and how difficult that can be. So let's dive straight in, and I don't want to make this a long-winded video, and let's talk about our DIY gels. So why would we want to make our own gels? So obviously we've just spoken about the cost. It's very easy to get up to a few $100 a month if we're doing that sort of volume in training and that sort of volume in gels. So cost is going to be one. Another thing I feel quite good is the control. We can play around with our gels as far as how many carbs are in each gel. And we can start looking at, okay, do I want to try a day when I'm going to run at 90 grams in those gels? Do I want to run a day when I'm going to bring it back to 40 grams? Also, I think from an environmental perspective, you know, what do we say there? 9 gels was the maximum within 2 of those brands. So that's a lot of gel packages that I've got to store in my back pocket, and I'm definitely not going to be throwing them on the side of the road. Let's talk about what ingredients we're going to need to be able to make our own gels. So if we look at the back of the gel packages, it does list the ingredients there. If we even throw it in just to a simple AI like ChatGPT, it's going to tell us that we're only going to need maltodextrin, and we're going to need fructose, and we're going to need sodium or salt. So they're very easy obtainable ingredients. And in fact, I ordered some online, and just to give you an idea, I ordered a 2.5 kilogram of maltodextrin. That cost me $25. I ordered a kilogram of fructose. It was $14.28, and I actually had one of those big jars of sacks of salt in the cupboard, and there's 75 grams, so I had to go and look that up, and you buy those at Woolworths for $4.50. Thanks, sweetheart, who does the shopping. So what else are we going to need to make our gels? Well, we're going to need a mixing bowl of some type. We're going to need scales so we can weigh the quantities out. We're going to need some hot water, so we're going to need to boil the jug at some point in the process. And we're going to need some way of storing those gels for while we're out in our training. So we're going to need some flasks and some bottles. Now, how do we work out the quantities we need? Well, that's quite simple. I use ChatGPT, and I ask ChatGPT, I give it a prompt, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to link down in the comments and across in the description a link to a resource pages I have on my website, and it actually has the prompt where you can simply click, copy that prompt, throw it in, and within that prompt you can say I'm doing a duration of, like example for today was 3.5 hours. I want 60 grams per hours. Can you give me the recipe for those gel? And in today's recipe, we came 140 gram of maltodextrin, 70 grams of fructose, and 23 grams of, 23, don't put 23 in, 2.3 grams of the salt or the sodium. So let's look at that in a cost comparison. Maltodextrin was, as I said, 2.5 kilos I got for 25 bucks. So 140 grams is going to cost us $1.40. Fructose, what did that cost me? $14.28 for a kilogram. So 70 grams of that's going to cost me $1. And the sodium, so the plain salt, I'm going to need 2 grams of that, $4.50 for 750 grams. That's just 2 cents. So the total cost now for this 3.5 hour training session is only going to be $2.42. So if we compare that to what were the numbers we were looking at, $27 through to $46 for that one ride, we can see how not only can we control what we're doing as far as the gels now, we can also reduce our cost quite significantly. And hey, maybe that can be another Ironman entry or another half Ironman entry fee. It's going to add up very, very quickly over the time. So now let's look at the process of how we make this up. Quite simply, what I do is I grab my scales out, I put those scales there, I've got my maltodextrin, I put 140 grams of maltodextrin into my measuring jar on the scale, so I can weigh that as I'm putting the product in. I then add the 70 grams of fructose, that brings me to what, 210 grams in total, and then I tip a bit of salt in. It's a very, very simple process. It's a very easy process. On the side of the measuring jar I've got, now today I was going to use the, I can't even remember the brand, I think it's a Profile Design. It carries about 280, 300 mils and it clips into your top tube. So I was going to use that particular flask, and that's pushing that flask to the limit with this sort of amount of gels. So anything over that, I would go and use my 500 ml bottle, and I would just mark, 1/3, mark the duration on the side. So if I'm doing a 5-hour ride, I might put 5 marks on the bottle, so I've got a rough idea of how much I'm consuming as we travel down the road. So once we've got all the ingredients in, I then give them I grab a fork and I give them a really good stir. What I want to do is make sure it's a really consistent powder with no lumps or anything like that in before I place the water in. I found that just stops getting clumpy gel mass that takes ages to mix out. So I get a nice sort of powdery finish there with the ingredients themselves, plus then the ingredients are fully mixed. So once I've got it to that point, I add the water. Now, as I said, I was using the Profile Design top tube gel flask, so I know it's around 280, 300 mil in that one. So I actually pour in 300 mils of boiling hot water from my jug that I've boiled already while this process is going on. So I know that that's going to come down a little bit once I mix it all in. So once it's all mixed in, it came down to about 270, 280 mil on the side of the jar, and then I just added a little bit of cold water to top that up to the 300 mil, and once again just stirred for a few minutes until I made sure there was good consistency there. If it's too warm, just pop the thing in the fridge for a little while, 15-20 minutes, let it cool down a bit. In this case, because I'd added the cold water, it wasn't too bad. I was able to tip it straight into the flask itself, and then I just stored that flask in the fridge for the next morning. I did this the day before the ride, just preparing, making sure it's ready, because I wanted to have an early start this morning. So the other thing that I do is with the water bottles themselves. So there's only 60 grams of carbs that I'm using per hour then. I'm also going to take 3 500 ml water bottles on that ride. Actually, one 750 ml and 2 500s. And I'm going to add another 30 grams of carbs to those. And all I'm going to use there is plain sugar out of the cupboard. So I'm going to pop the bottle on the scale itself. I'm going to zero it out. I'm going to throw in 30 grams of sugar. I'm going to throw in a gram or two of salt in it as well, and I'm going to get some of that no sugar cordial for flavour and whack that in on top of that as well. And while I'm talking about that, with your gels too, don't be afraid to throw in a shot of coffee in a gel. Like if I'm making a smaller gel up for a race using, say, that 150ml flask or something like that, I might make a caffeine gel up in one of those. You can add anything to flavour you like. I often will add a little bit of that no sugar cordial to the gels just for the flavour, but to be honest, I don't mind the flavour of the basic gels, but you'll work that out just for trial and error yourself. But for a caffeine gel, hey, shot of coffee, throw it in, and there you go. You're hitting that sort of, well, half Ironman, for instance. I've got a half Ironman next week at the Tweed Enduro, and I'll have probably a 40-gram gel with a lap to go, so with 8k to go with a bit of caffeine in it, and that might help me get through the finish, but we'll see next week how that works out. Anyway, that's all what I really wanted to do today. I wanted to talk about making our own gels, the reasons why we make our own gels, the cost benefits to that, and hopefully that adds some value to you guys. So until the next video, if you've subscribed, I'll see you then. If you haven't subscribed, feel free to, but stay safe out there on the roads and enjoy the process. Cheers.